Hello again, whiskey friends. Thanks for joining everybody for another Whiskey Wednesday. And what an epic Whiskey Wednesday we have tonight. You know that we love some Hard Truth, and we have Bryan and Chris from Hard Truth in the back right now that are going to be talking about the brand, their new bourbon releases, and some other questions that we have for them the rest of the night. Now, it won't be quite like riding in ATVs with them around the fields in Indiana, but I still think it's going to be a really good time. So thank you for joining us today, whiskey friends. Let's kick off the show. All right. Well, we are quite excited to talk about some Hard Truth tonight. I even had a little bit of adventure tonight. Drove to Indiana to make sure that I got some Hard Truth bourbons here ready. So we are going to talk about the new releases. And I got to sample them a little bit before we go live tonight. So we will be talking about those. And oh man, are we going to have some good times. Let's bring on first Kelsey. Kelsey and Darrell, as I bring you on, the question I'm going to have for you tonight is going to be, what is your favorite of the Hard Truth releases thus far? Kelsey, let's bring you on first.
What's up, everybody? Cheers to you. Mine has to be the caramel malt. It's so good. I mean, it is ridiculously good. I wish I had batch 2. Still waiting for Jeffrey to get me that one, but just need batch 2.
What, we're like 3 weeks away from going down there. You can grab yourself a batch 2. I'm sure it's at the distillery. All right, Darrell, what's yours favorite?
I got 2 answers. If we're talking about ever that I've tried so far, it's definitely that single barrel that we got at the distillery, the Tours and Tasting. But if we're looking at normal releases so far, I don't even know if it's considered normal release, but the finished PX sherry that we started with a little earlier, that is just fantastic whiskey. It's really, really good.
Oh.
There you go. Actually, mine's the other one. PX Brandy.
PX
Brandy? It's like a lighter label. There you go.
That's the one.
That thing's ridiculous.
Well, let's bring on Bryan and Chris. Bryan and Chris, introduce yourselves to everybody as you come on here, and we'll then get the conversation started.
Hey guys, Bryan Smith, Master Distiller, Hard Truth Distilling Company. Thanks for having us on, buddy.
And I'm Chris Moore. I'm the barrel manager with Hard Truth, and it's good to be here.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, yeah.
I see all those Hard Truth bottles behind you all. We've got a lot to drink through tonight.
We do, and we're not going to leave tonight until we've had every single one. That would get me in a lot of trouble, but someone's got to do the hard work, right?
Yeah,
I would be in trouble as well if I did that.
Thanks for having us on. I enjoyed it. It's been about a year since we've seen 2 of you at least, and out riding around out in the woods and having some fun, drinking some good whiskey from the barrel. I think Chris treated you all to a nice sampling from the barrels, and that was a fun day. It was great hanging out with y'all.
No, it was fantastic. Everything about that was great. Started off with good lunch, then the tour, like the whole ATV, like just everything about that was probably like one of the best picks I've been on, in all honesty. Not even saying it because you guys are here, but
yeah,
like I've been on maybe like 4 or 5, but just that whole experience from start to finish was it was really, really good, man. Appreciate y'all.
Yeah. Thank you. Our pleasure.
Little Hoosier hospitality.
Well, Bryan and Chris, just to start us out here, let's get this a little on a personal level. What got you started in the industry? How did you end up in this moment with Hard Truth, making all this great whiskey?
Well, I suppose I'll start first because my story kind of leads into Chris's. So I've always had a real passion for creating flavors. Started in food, and then with my dad, I got introduced to winemaking with his buddies down in southern Indiana. They made basically what they call farmer's wine. And so, I got to understand fermentation. Got into college, started making beer, all for just pleasure and for a hobby. But the through line through all of it is I have a real unending passion of just creating delicious flavors and then sharing good stuff with people. That's really where. And then I love science. I've always been a science nerd from when I was a little kid. I was the kid with the big poster board in fifth grade and came to Bloomington and Indiana University with my crystals display, and so I've always loved science. So science and making flavors, really comes together nicely with whiskey. So I met the guys who had started Quaffon Brewing Company in Indiana, very successful beer brand that's still I think is top 3 craft brewer in the state of Indiana. And the laws had just recently changed to allow for a brewery or a winery in good standing to open up a distillery or to get a license to distill. And that's when I met those guys, and the rest is history. And I live in Bloomington, Indiana, about 30 minutes away from the distillery in Nashville, Indiana, and home of Indiana University. And I live close to the biggest Kroger, maybe. I even think, even considering Cincinnati, I think it might be the biggest Kroger, or the highest top selling Kroger in the country. And had this awesome wine steward there that would help me understand about wine because I knew very little. Super smart guy with a great palate, and his name happened to be Chris Moore. And so Chris and I got talking about our distillery. We had just gone into distribution with, I think, our gin maybe, and our cinnamon vodka and our toasted coconut rum, our non-whiskey spirits. And Chris started talking to me about, opportunities at the distillery. And just like me, he started from the bottom up, bottling, distilling, processing. And then now he's where he is today, doing some awesome stuff with Hard Truth and really taking command on some special programs like the barrel finish program. And so with that, I'll hand it to Chris.
Yeah.
Bryan left out the part where I bothered him for about 2 years to get on, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
But so I was at Kroger for, I think, close to 5 years, big wine background, helped take that business up another level as far as fine wine, North American whiskey, tequila, and just started nerding out with Bryan and bothered him probably every other week for 2 straight years and got my foot in the door and just worked my way up to where we're at now. And we just get to make a bunch of delicious whiskey and have fun.
Oh, man. Persistence pays off. You get your own origin story with that.
For sure.
Yeah, it was great. Those conversations, I'll never forget the final one. Before he, because they're obviously along the way, I've gotten approached by a lot of people for opportunities in the distillery. And literally at that time when he was asking me, it was me and Martin and Cole. There were 3 of us, and we hadn't even really moved to the big distillery yet. And I kept saying, I said, keep in touch with me. Let's keep talking. Yeah, I know there'll be an opportunity. I just don't have one right now. And so he did, and it's just been great. Chris is just indispensable part of the team. We've got a great team.
Thanks, Bryan.
Yeah. So when it comes to the origin of Hard Truth was established in 2015. When did you start distilling whiskey then?
So we started distilling about midway through 2015. So Cole Smith was the first person. They kind of brought him from the brewery to set up the stills. No one really in the company had much experience with distilling. outside of hobby distilling. And so the first stills were really not great. We still have them. They do work, and it's actually, I think it's kind of like with a lot of stories. If you could figure out how to make something good with really bad equipment, then it gives you a lot shorter runway for where you're going. So Cole had made one batch of malt whiskey using some malted barley from the brewery. And that's when I joined the team. And then, from the beginning, there wasn't really, like a lot of the stories that you've read in the, distilling, culture is that, someone leaves wherever, Angels Envy, and they go and there's some investment and they kind of have this big marketing plan, and it's kind of all canned, right? They've got this, they already know what it's going to be, and they just got to get there and get the liquid in the bottle. Ours was completely different from that. I mean, there was, the partners I work with are purebred entrepreneurs. They jump off of the cliff and then try to figure out how to build a bridge. And so really all this evolved in a very organic way. But then at a certain point when the property, we found the property for the where the distillery is now, they were ready to go big. And so that's when we really started to dig into what was going on. Spent a lot of time in Kentucky, obviously. And so, moving from non-whiskey spirits and really knowing that our goal was to become, a bourbon and rye whiskey or a whiskey distillery, and that's what we wanted to be known for. But I can tell you that in my wildest, I mean, some people ask, like, can you believe this happened? Yeah, I can, because I know all the hard work and the dedication and the focus that everyone on our team has had and continues to have. But what that form of that, has become has been an evolving thing. It's been really cool to watch. So, we started with the vodkas and the rums, and the gins, the things that, that you can put out into the market without aging them. And the good news is through the brewery, we have some brew pubs, and we had about 8 brew pubs in the state of Indiana. So we were able to kind of take those spirits to our brew pubs and start to introduce them to the customer base in Indiana that way, which really was a leg up. So the good news is that what we produced was really, really well received, and we grew, and then it was let's go big or go home. And so that's when the plans for the big distillery got started. And once we moved over there, the first day we turned on the still, we made bourbon whiskey, and every day since then we've been making either bourbon or rye, on those stills. And that was we turned the stills on October 6, 2018.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have some stuff that's been aging since 2018?
Oh yeah. And a lot of it's in the bottles that you have behind you. So
also just blending it with some of the younger stuff that you're doing now.
Well, really,
No?
Yeah, but like the first sweet mash rye, when it came out in 2021, I mean, that's what, it was 2.5 to 3 years old. So it was really, we've kind of kept up with our, the older stuff, but obviously we set back some stuff from behind. But the sweet mash bourbons that we just launched in the market, the, sweet mash bourbon, wheated, and the 4-grain, all that liquid is from that 2018 to 2019 time period, basically.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
And we're still setting back stuff in that 4 to 5 year range now. That's just going to keep getting older, and the older it gets, the more delicious it gets. So we're looking forward to that too.
Nice.
Yeah.
So that's one of the thought processes that I'm curious about. If we go all the way back to the beginning of that, when you're laying down your first distillate, you didn't just lay down one mash bill. How many different mash bills did you lay down, even in that first year?
How many, Brian?
Dizzying number. so many that I have to ask Chris, what was this mash bill again? what is RW17? What is that one again? No, really, it's the result of a creative mind, but also, goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier, where you don't know what you're going to make until you make it, right? So we knew that we had great equipment, we had fantastic inputs, all the ingredients were great. We had great equipment, great barrels. We knew we were going to be a sweet mash distillery. We knew it was all going to be fantastic whiskey, but what it actually tasted like, we weren't really sure, right? So there are some distilleries that make, a killer, bourbon using rye as the small grain, but they're weeded, not so much, right? So, and it's not because they don't know what they're doing. It's just that, there's so many, it's the alchemy of whiskey. There's so many decisions, so many variables, that some things just, end up, you can't bend them like you want it. Just either the climate, the water, the grain, whatever it is, creates a flavor profile that you either love or it's not your favorite, right? So part of it, the thinking was, let's kind of cast a wide net, because those first couple of years we weren't making a whole lot of whiskey. Let's cast a wide net, start to taste it, and then get a real feel for where we're going. So good news is we aren't making quite as many mash bills, but the ones that we're making, we are absolutely certain that they are killers.
Well, and what all those mash bills did, like that we laid down originally, so that laid the groundwork for us to be able to kind of tailor each one of those spirits to have the flavor profile that we were looking for. So it really, having all those mash bills and all those different barrel types, it really gave us the creative control to blend everything and make sure it tastes the way it does now.
Yeah, and the good news is some of these, with the Master Distillers Reserve series and with the Barrel Finish Reserve series, we're able to take some of those, smaller number of barrels that are delicious, but that we're not going to have on, every shelf in the 25 states that we're in, or 23 states that we're in. We're able to offer those up kind of in limited measure, something fun for the consumer and for us, and to get some kind of interesting, interest out there, because there's a lot of fatigue because there are a lot of products out right now, but I know that people don't just want just our sweet mash rye; they want to try some other things from us. So, where actually Chris and I have been this last 2 weeks, we're in the think tank right now, washing around a bunch of different ideas on what's going to come at the end of the year this year. And I can tell you that it's a good problem to have, but we've got a lot of great options. We got to start focusing them down.
So tell the sales reps you want more SKUs.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Guys, you have basically labeled your product. You've been mentioning it all the time, sweet mash. So two things. One, explain to people that may not know the difference between a sweet mash and a sour mash, but why sweet mash? Was that obviously there was an intent and a purpose behind that, or else you wouldn't have put it on the brand as often and mentioned it as often if you didn't believe in that particular way of making the distillate. I'm just curious as to why.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll tell a quick story. Whenever we were in that process of figuring out what we wanted to be when we grew up, and we, the property was being purchased, Cole and myself were taking a lot of road trips down to Kentucky, and we had hit all the big ones. It's a wonderful industry. Obviously, you've heard all the stories about how welcoming these big distillers are, and they really were. It was incredible. There's one little distillery on the map that it just hit the craft. It had hit the craft trail, but they didn't have any whiskey out yet. But we were like, we're down here near Lexington. Let's just go there anyways. And it was in Danville, Kentucky, and it was Wilderness Trail. And so at that time, all they had out in the market was their Blue Heron vodka and their Harvest rum, which is made from sorghum. And they had one little teeny tiny rick house, and they were building their next little medium-sized one. And they were running an 18-inch continuous Vendome column. They had just started running it. So went down there, met Shane Baker and Pat Heist from Wilderness Trail. Couldn't be nicer guys, super smart guys. They had ulterior motives to sell us yeast, which they ultimately did. But the key was, the way that these guys approach making whiskey was very similar to what I aspired to be, which is, they weren't trying to break categories. They were staying true to tradition for the most part, but through scientific reasoning, they were making choices that were, made based on, organoleptic evaluation, but through a scientific process. And they were able to articulate it in a way that completely, connected with me. And so I keep hearing them talking about sweet mash through our visit that day. And, I'm thinking, well, this kind of sounds like a marketing thing. I'm not really exactly sure. And then they took us into their first little rick house. If you've ever been on their property, it's just this little teeny tiny one, especially next to all the gargantuan ones that are there now. And drilled a barrel of their oldest whiskey at the time, which was a just turned 2-year-old rye whiskey. And it absolutely blew my mind. I had never tasted anything so complex on my palate. And I don't even want to say it tasted older, but I will say so complex at such a young age, but complex in the best way, right? It definitely wasn't ready to put it in the bottle, but it was just sweet and it was spicy and it was this explosion of flavor. And yet I detected no off flavors in it, which, usually a 2-year-old whiskey, you're going to taste some potential, but then you're going to taste some of those off flavors that you rely on the barrel to subtract from the whiskey over time. And they explained to me scientifically why that was through sweet mash. And so it really was a hard stop for me. I went out to the parking lot, called my partners, and I said, hey, you guys need to come down here. We would need to talk because, I'm very, for me, it's all about creating flavor. I'm very palate driven. So I can hear all the ideas and, nerd out about techniques, but unless I taste it, it doesn't really mean anything to me. So that was really the genesis for us going into sweet mashing. But as far as what it brings, really for me, and then I'll let Chris talk about more from a flavor note standpoint. But for me, it just celebrates the grain in the best way possible. The distillate, the new make distillate that comes off the still, is so clean. It's so sweet. It's bright. It's juicy. It's fruity. It's just incredible. And then I looked around and I thought, I was like, well, who's doing sweet mash? And they're like, well, those guys at this little distillery called Kentucky Peerless, they're doing some sweet mash, but that's pretty much it. And so I knew that being north of the Ohio River, we also had, we have a steeper hill to climb as far as competing in the whiskey world. So, I think having something that's a unique identifier doesn't hurt in our case. So that's kind of how we got started with it. But maybe Chris can talk more about kind of, from an evaluation standpoint, some of the differences that he tastes, because I know he's tasted through a lot of sour mash whiskeys over his time too.
Yeah, so the flavor profiles that we get off that distillate, like Bryan said, it's always going to be very sweet, very developed flavor profile. But more importantly, what we notice is you get a lot of almost like tropical fruits. You'll get tons of mango or papaya, sometimes a little bit of pineapple, but there's always this bright burst of vanilla. So what that allows us to do is, instead of focusing on those char 4 and char 5 barrels that your great grandpas always used for that subtraction that Bryan was talking about to pull those green notes out of the whiskey, we can opt for different barrel profiles that are lower in char, different toast profiles. So instead of worrying about the subtraction aspect, we can look at what that barrel type is going to do to boost the flavor profile we're looking for.
That's awesome. I will say that, at least for me, my limited knowledge, I'm starting to see more distillers go this direction. I think Wilderness Trail started it. You guys started it. I was just at Ben Holiday in Missouri. That's exactly what they're doing. And when talking to the master distiller, tasting the mash, tasting the distillate, I've never tasted so much fruit on a distillate. Right?
Isn't that crazy? It is wild.
It's nuts. And, usually when you're tasting and they have 2 mash bills right now, tasting both of them, typically on the higher corn mash bill, you taste corn, right? I didn't taste corn at all on the mash or the distillate. It was real super fruity. It was like a Sour Patch Kid on the mash. It was sour
Yeah.
and it was super fruity. But it's interesting to see also, you guys are doing spiral cuts on some of your barrels now. They're doing spiral cuts as well to experiment and do things. They got a little cave that they age theirs in and do something a little different. But it's interesting to hear more of these younger distilleries do stuff that's outside the norm, which I think gives you guys, like you said, a leg up, but also gives the consumer something that they haven't tasted before. So
yeah, and I'm glad
kudos.
you brought up the barrels, and Chris, you as well, bring up the barrels, because thank you very much. I appreciate that, and you hit the nose, the nail right on the head. It's something new for the consumer, but it's celebrating the same parts and pieces, right?
Yeah.
But to what Chris was talking about and what you were talking about with the barrels, there's, if you follow any of the blogs from Independent Stave, Andrew Riebrink, who's a very smart guy, who's awesome and very articulate about why barrels give what they give and what they do. He's one of those guys where we took all our new make to him because we were going to work with Independent Stave, and they helped makers with their 46 project and the stave finishing and all that. They're super awesome coopers and a great business. But Andrew, he's kind of the same. He's in the same boat. He's a younger guy. He's a Kentucky guy. He loves Kentucky bourbon. It's tattooed on his arm. But he really isn't. He looks at it from a data-driven standpoint. So he's doing all this experimentation, and what he found was that this, especially a char one with a complex toast, with really clean, good distillate, was creating some incredible whiskeys. And not only from like a sensory panel, but he was looking at it on spider graphs from the HPLC, data, and showing all the compounds, how much more extraction was coming out with these whiskeys, and you could taste on your palate. So, working closely with Andrew and then with Shane and Pat, right from the beginning, before we even turned on our stills, was a huge leg up for us. And of course, we take what they've done, and then we put our own twist to that and do our own thing. But really, having those guys was incredibly important for our development.
Well, and the cool thing about the barrels that they offer for us with those custom toasts, the extraction level we get within a year to 2 year time frame versus a 3, 4, 5 plus, the amount of flavor that you get out of those is just insane.
I would say the thing that's most impressed me as a typically bourbon drinker, as tasting your ryes were the first ones that I tasted, was the viscosity of the mouthfeel that comes off out of that age, right?
Right.
We talked a little bit about, the extraction and everything else, but on the palate side of things, where I'm noticing it is in the viscosity of the distillate itself. It's interesting, but it's also very impressive. And obviously, we were all impressed by your single barrel that we were talking about, because it killed some pretty touted bottles. I mean, for a 3-year-old rye to take down some of the bottles that it took down, but that's one of the cool things about whiskey, in my opinion, is innovative thinking, but also honoring the history that's been there before and growing on somebody else's thought process and expanding it and making it your own. So that's been one of the cool things about your brand, as well as the whiskey, that I haven't been able to meet you guys yet, but we will meet in April next month.
Awesome.
I hope so. We're making a trip down to
if they're there. We're making it there on a Saturday.
We're gonna make it there. Hopefully I get to meet you in person. But that was one of the things that we all three of us talked about, was just the complexity and the viscosity of a whiskey at that age.
Yeah.
To compete with some of the historic distilleries in a way that has never been challenged before, in my opinion, of a whiskey. So that's one of the things that, was exciting to me.
Thank you. Mouthfeel is, thank you for those kind words. I really appreciate it. Mouthfeel is so important. I mean, it's when you can get the viscosity and you can get the viscosity a couple different ways. Depending on the oil content of your grain and the way that you run your still, you can bring those oils, some of those oils pass over in distillation. So starting with a really good grain with a good oil content with good flavors, and then tuning your still to where you're not stripping those oils away, but you're bringing them over through distillation. But then also the toasting of the barrel and leaving that char a little bit lighter, that can also increase the mouthfeel. We found with especially one or two of the barrel styles specifically, and spiral cuts are great, but that's not one of the ones that we've found. But there's two really barrel styles that Chris and I, from the very beginning, like when we were starting to taste them 1 year old, we're like, man, this is like custard or like creme brulee. It's like thick, and as long as the flavor's great behind it, that's a wonderful thing because it hangs out on your palate longer, coats your mouth, and leaves that nice flavor behind.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, and I think it's all those things together that really allow us to kind of become trailblazers in a sense in the whiskey world. We're not really shackled to a lot of the things that the sour mash world kind of out of necessity makes you keep doing generation after generation. So we're allowed to play with a lot more of these things that a lot of distillers have never really even thought about before, because this is how Grandpa used to do it.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll be the grandpas one day of the.
There you go.
I'll race you. I've got more white hair than you do anyway.
Oh,
Sweet
man.
mash revolution happening in American whiskey, right?
Well, with that segue there, before we talk about the bourbons that have released this month, I mean, starting at kind of the origin here, this might throw people off when I throw it up here, but Kentucky Sweet Mash with a Hard Truth label. You told us an interesting story about this particular bottle and some of these mash bills that we can always see at the bottom there. Why don't you give us a little background on where this started and how it flows into what you released this month?
Yeah, that falls into the category of wasn't planning on releasing it that way, whenever we decided to release it, but we're really happy about that. And for those of you who got a bottle of that, yeah, I wasn't lying when I told you that was a unicorn, one of a kind thing. It truly is. And for those of you who like to hunt for whiskey, I have actually seen there are still some bottles of that on the shelf, definitely in Indiana and Kentucky. So if you look around, poke around, in fact, I think some of the big reds in Indiana and maybe some Kentucky Liquor Barn. I'm not sure exactly who all has it, but if you look around, we've got little Spirit Finder widgets on our hardtruth.com, and you can drop down the menu and go search for it. But so those were 35 barrels, our first three mash bills. So our sweet mash bourbon, our wheated bourbon, and our sweet mash rye. So those first three mash bills that I whittled down on a pad and paper, as we were breaking ground on the distillery, my partner Ed said, well, why don't we have Wilderness Trail, give us some time on their stills, and we'll make, your first three mash bills. And that way we have some barrels while we're building the distillery, you kind of get an idea of what they taste like and, blah, blah, blah. So we talked to Shane and Pat. It wasn't what they were doing some contract distilling, but it was just whatever their mash bill was, right? It wasn't, they weren't doing customizable things. But since we were working with them, they were great dudes. They agreed to let us do one batch of each. So essentially we had 12 barrels of one, 12 barrels of the second one, and I think 11 of the third one. And so we made them. We stored them there in Kentucky for a year, and then once we got our first rack house built, we brought them to Indiana and let them sit. So here's where the story gets interesting, though. So by this time, we've started making our own whiskey, making those same mash bills. I had tasting notes from the stuff we made at Wilderness Trail, from the new make all the way through. And as we started tasting through our stuff, we realized the flavors were way different. So you've got the same still, the same barrel supplier, sweet mash, the exact same yeast. I really learned my process, the genesis of my process from those guys. And yet and the same exact mash bill, and yet we've got whiskeys that really taste completely different from one another. Now, they're delicious, but very, very different. So as our whiskey started coming around, we really were loving it. And I'm thinking, geez, like even if I just put one barrel from that lot into a batch of whiskey, it's going to alter the flavor. And we've only got 12. So once we do 12 batches, then we're out of those barrels, and I can't keep that consistency moving forward. Because that's one thing that, Chris and I are obsessed with is really, we get down into the weeds. Every barrel is tasted multiple times before it's released. And we've got, this huge spreadsheet that Chris spends hours of time creating, where we can make sure that we, have the barrels set to where we create consistency with improving quality, moving forward. So I just didn't know how we could do that with those barrels. So that's when my partner Ed again said, let's just release them as single barrels. So that's how those came to the world. And then we thought, well, we'll just call them the Origin series. That way we can tell cool stories like this on cool podcasts like this.
Yeah. And then to bring it full circle, I got a Kroger sticker on the back.
Nice.
You mentioned
There it
Kroger
is.
earlier.
And the good news is we have somebody who absolutely loves spreadsheets, and you have two other people that absolutely loves tasting whiskey. So if you ever need help
The
doing
trick
the
is doing
spreadsheets
both of
for the
those at the
whiskey,
same time.
Yeah.
we can do them all at the same time.
Yeah.
Chris, we got that in common, right? Lots of spreadsheets, drinking and spreadsheets. It all works out, right?
And then Brian looks at it and panics. I'm like, oh wait, I gotta refresh that real quick. Sorry.
Or I build a blend and then I'm like, are all these barrels still in here? He's like, what? Now it's updated. And I'm like, oh no, they're gone.
Yeah, we're in the same boat.
Intentionality is everything. You can't just can't phone this stuff in. I mean, we've got a dedication. It's great. Chris and I get to do this, but we've got a dedicated team of hardworking people who have been with us since the very beginning. I mean, Martin and Derek and Shalee, and there's so many people down there on the floor. I couldn't name them all, but these are people who work very, very hard. So it's very important that Chris and I, once the whiskey's ready to go out to the world, that we take care of the future of it, to make sure that people can be enjoying, like I said, at least the same quality, if not better as we move forward. But not really, the flavor profile is not going to be all over the place, right? We want to celebrate some differences, but we really want it to be pretty consistent. So it's not the easiest to do that, especially with so many barrel styles that we have, but it's makes for a fun challenge.
Now,
So
are
if
you
you're starting
guys...
a distillery, pivot tables.
Yeah,
pivot tables are dope. I love those.
Yes, I love these guys.
You found your people, Jeffrey.
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Are you
Now,
guys
Linda,
utilizing both independent stave locations in Missouri and Kentucky, or just one of the two?
So all of our barrels come from the Missouri cooperage,
Okay.
because that right now, currently, they're working on the Kentucky cooperage to bring toasting capabilities there. But right now, any barrels that are toasted or barrels that are using those 18 to 24 month air dried staves, which we use, are all in Missouri. We're also working with West Virginia Great Barrel Company.
Okay.
There was a period of time where barrels were kind of difficult to get. And I got to meet Miko from that company, and he was a great dude, and he let me try some whiskey from their barrels, and they're awesome. So we've incorporated them into our fold as well. So we use both barrels now.
Nice. Very cool.
Brian, I got a quick question. In terms of, like, you mentioned consistency a second ago.
Yeah.
Right. I always find it hard. Like, I love blending whiskey and just creating just like one-offs. You guys do a lot of like small batches, just say caramel malt in particular, right? This is maybe the second batch. How difficult is it? Because you did mention it's difficult to kind of replicate what you're doing. Like, obviously every single barrel is different, trying to batch them to create that same profile. Like, are you blinding maybe like the original profile to what you're blending to try to get the new one? Like, how, like, what's the process?
That's a great,
That's
a great question. So no one's really ever asked me that question. So great job on that question. I love it, and I'm going to try to keep my answer short because I could talk about this forever. So we aren't. I would say that there's not been a single time that Chris and I have sat in the lab and tried to back engineer into a flavor profile for that consistency. What we've done instead is we know of the different barrel profiles that we have. So if it's char one, HTR one profile, or if it's a wave stave or whatever we're using, we know because of those handy dandy spreadsheets that Chris created. We know how many we have moving forward of each of those styles. And so when we came up with the original blend of those, that was it was representational. It was representative of the spread of what we had available, plus the flavor profile we wanted, right? So because of that, if I know we're going to pull 8 HTR1 char 1 barrels and 3 of this one and 6 of this one, we know that that's going to really, because those barrels specifically give very unique characteristics, we know that that's going to get us pretty much somewhere in the, around that middle target. And then if it's a little bit hair to the left or to the right or whatever, the only thing that Chris and I are concerned about is, we want to make sure that the quality is up to the standard, right? We don't ever want the quality to go down. And then, I will tell you that they're, after the first 3 years, when we started tasting some of this 3-year-old, especially the sweet mash rye, and we were like, damn, I don't know.
Blown away.
I don't know if we're going to want to put any more oak to this or not. So, it might just be that, we might have to start pulling this whiskey out, because maybe at 4.5 years, the oak is going to overpower that fruit. And so the good news, find some wood. The good news is so far, it's always gotten better, and it's not like the wood's not out competing, the fruit and the richness. It's just continuing to accent it.
Yeah. Have you seen the extraction levels go up or down with age?
They're going up, but what I like is Chris and I call it integration. So, it's like at 2.5 to 3.5 years, you can pick out this and this and this and this. But what we're finding now at 4.5 to 5.5 years is those flavors are like this. And then the sum of the parts is far greater than those parts were when they kind of weren't integrated together. So I wouldn't say we've not reached, there hasn't been a single whiskey, at least that I've tried, where I've been like, oh man, that's really oaky, or, whatever as far as the extraction.
Just way more complex, really rich. It's just, it's developing in a way that I didn't think that was possible. So it's been really nice to see those kind of come into their own.
Have you guys considered, I don't know, this is just me wanting what I want, but have you guys ever considered with some of these barrels that you're experimenting with, the difference in climate just from Indiana to Kentucky and aging them at different places to get a different profile, or if the distillate is moving in a different direction at a different location?
I'll let Chris answer that one. He loves this part.
The trick to that is Indiana has a lot of those high highs and low lows as far as temperature already. And in order for us to protect our Indiana rye status, we can't transport those across the Kentucky line. So we're going to keep those in the Hoosier State.
Nice.
Yeah, and really, so if I know you've not been to our place yet, but we use basically single story palletized rack houses. So we're stacking 6 high. There is some temperature difference from the top to the bottom and humidity difference, which, Chris has accounted there. It's definitely not as dramatic as like a 5-story Kentucky rick house where it could be 138 up top and 68 down below, all year. It could stay that cold, down there throughout the summer months. That really creates a very dramatic difference in flavor profile. We do have some differences from top to bottom. But there you go. Nice. But they're not as dramatic. So originally, after we built the first, palletized house, our plan was for number 2 to be a traditional rick house. And then we were going to build traditional rick houses everywhere, every year after that. By the time we got to building that second one, we were so enamored with the flavor profile we were getting from the whiskey. We're like, well, shit, if we I mean, if we make a change now, it's going to really change the flavor of that whiskey, because
Right.
especially in the tops of those Kentucky houses, I mean, that really pushes out some very specific flavors from that wood. If you notice on our whiskeys, especially our ryes, most people are used to, especially a real high with a lot of rye in the mash bill. They're used to that dill or that mint characteristic. We really don't have that in our whiskey.
Thank you very much for not having that, by the way.
But it is definitely something that people either love or they don't love.
Well, and that's true.
You know where he stands.
Yeah.
I have blinded the caramel malt and confused the hell out of people around here before they knew what it was.
Yeah.
I was like, so what do you think that is? Every single time, that's a bourbon. I was like, no, it's not a bourbon. Yeah. Because it's just, there's not been a rye, to be honest with you, that tastes like that at all in any of the markets. So that's
a huge compliment. Thank you.
It is. I mean, it goes to the fact of nobody really gets to see the behind the scenes crap that gets to the point. They only get to see the finished product a lot of the time. And the product speaks for itself, even without knowing everything that you did up to that point. Makes even more now, but up to just at that point, it really speaks volumes to what you guys are doing, and how well it's being processed, and how I'm excited to see how well people are receiving it.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, the aging process throughout the years is endlessly fascinating for Chris and I to observe, and really, like right now, from March to April is when he and I will get a far better gauge of what the whiskey we released this year, where it's going to be. It makes for whatever reason, it really makes a big difference whenever it goes from being cold and it starts to get into being, more of like the liquid gets into that, 50, 60 degree range. The flavor profiles, it's almost like you can taste what that last year did for that whiskey, but if you taste it in February, and from February, especially from like, January, February to like April, May, all of our whiskeys make a gigantic change. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, you've got 2 points per year all that whiskey will go through like a really big tipping point as far as flavor profile. It has a dramatic shift, and that's when we'll go in and grab samples. We reevaluate everything, make sure our flavor profiles are correct, our scores are correct, our recipe's correct. We adjust whatever we need to make sure that we've got that quality going out.
Well, you can definitely tell.
We're really obsessed.
Well, here's the thing. I'm really super excited to hear your thoughts on this, because I'm pretty sure with your wine knowledge, some of this was probably your doing with the PX and the brandy.
Just like the every other week emails, I think I bothered Bryan probably once a month or so about doing barrel finish stuff, and he gave me the keys to the castle last year. We had some fun with that, and the PX sherry's been a fantastic hit.
I mean, all of them. I really enjoy all of them.
Thank you.
I think the only one I really haven't even tasted yet is the
Sauterne.
The Sauternes. Yeah. That's the only one I haven't tasted yet, but I loved everything that y'all put out with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chris, he kept asking me about it, and I said, man, I've got like 50 things in my little book that I want to do, and right now we've got to keep focused, but we'll get to it, and then finally I was just like, you know what? Just why don't you, you've got that wine and wine-based spirit knowledge. Let's talk about, you've evaluated all the whiskey with me. Let's talk about, which blends you think would match with which kind of style barrel. And then I said, my only ask of you is that when you go out to get those casks, even if we can only afford one or two of them, buy the best of the best of the best that you can buy. And that's all I ask, because, there's a lot of sherry finished whiskeys out there, and, some of them are just okay. You know what I mean? Let's do something that really knocks it out of the park. So he really did some searching, and the PX brandy was that was one I'd never even heard of really. And then obviously the cognac and the sherry and the Sauternes, they all are very unique in their own way, and they've been huge hits. It's been really fun to watch that go.
You left such an impression on me. I mean, I can still imagine you pulling out that bung with the rag around it, pulling it out of the barrel and thieving from that thing. that when I heard they were released, I had to make the road trip down from Cincinnati just in a
Nice.
random day in December, and then had to explain to my wife the $1,600 bill that came up later, but it wasn't all for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't
he
know
was
how those
helping his
got here.
friends out. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Many people I bought that for.
Wow. Well, thank you for the support. Really appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Thank
man.
you.
But no, that was quite the day. But as soon as I saw you drop those, I think it was like in November, I was like, I gotta make a road trip. So the moment I
Yeah.
had a chance, it was to get
For
all
sure.
those.
And keep your eyes out too, because we've got more stuff coming out this year. Like I said, get a hold of your sales reps. Tell them you want more SKUs.
Will
Yeah.
do, definitely.
Yeah.
One of the things that I loved about that particular series too was the backbone of your distillate was still there. It wasn't overtaken by finish. You pulled it at the right time to be able to have finish, but not be overdone and not just to be, lack of a better term, just to be a finish rather than a finished whiskey. So, man, just I'm excited to hear what you guys are coming up with next, because if that's what you're doing right now, it's only going to get better. So,
Well, and our the big push this February was obviously our bourbon. So, our first 3 bourbon mash bills, our sweet mash bourbon and the black label, and that one is our kind of it's a pretty straight down the middle mash bill, 73 corn, 19 rye, 8 malted barley. And we really wanted, one lesson we learned from our sweet mash rye was, while a lot of people who love big whiskeys and robust cask strength whiskeys love that whiskey, we had bartenders across the United States the bartenders were like, oh, we love that, but we're not going to put that in an old fashioned. The bottle cost is too high, the string too high. And so that's where our high road rye came out. For those of y'all who maybe haven't seen this one yet, that is a really great rye whiskey. So with this is a different mash bill of our rye, and it's got some corn in it, about 38% corn. And so we found that one really plays nice at 93 proof. And so that brings the bottle cost down. So it sits on the shelf at like $39.99. But yet it's still a real, it's got all that DNA, like you were talking about, that DNA, that hard truth DNA.
Yep.
So we wanted to do the same thing for our bourbon release. So that sweet mash bourbon, that mash bill, I mean, when you drink that sweet mash bourbon, it does not, to me, it drinks over a 90 proof in the best way. You know what I mean? Sometimes 90 proof bourbons are a little thin, and it retains that nice viscosity, mouthfeel. So that one's been a great one. And then, of course, the true mark of a distiller and a distillery is to be able to release something bottled in bond, because you just can't do that, fiddling around with other stuff. So, it was, I had it in my book from the day we started making whiskey that our first bourbon release should be a bottled in bond. And so we really released all 3 of those together. So our wheated is bottled in bond, and our 4 grains bottled in bond. And those have just been, all 3 of them have been really, really well received. It's definitely by far our biggest whiskey drop. So it's probably the one that people will be able to find in more stores around the country. So your viewers. And then, if you find the bourbon and don't see any of the rye, make sure and ask your liquor store, for wherever, for the sweet mash rye, because I'll tell you, although there is a shift happening and people are coming to understand that rye doesn't have to be the one thing they think that it is, right?
Right.
And more people are getting into the rye. Just the numbers don't lie. The Nielsen data is still bourbon absolutely rules, right? So, and I'm interested to hear what you guys have, if you've had a chance to try the bourbons yet, but that wheated and the 4 grain, definitely, they're all getting a lot of attention. But I found that there are some people who are very aggressively excited about the wheated or the 4 grain specifically, and they keep sending me messages about, like, are you sure there isn't any in this whiskey? I'm like, no.
That's funny that you say that. Like, quick thing before you came on, Bryan. Jeff poured a little bit of the 90 proof for his wife. And she tasted and immediately was like, wait, this is really good for a 90 proof. Still has all the flavor and all that good stuff. Like as you were talking to, like it retains that flavor profile. Like it doesn't seem like it's like watered down much or anything like that. But that was the first thing she said, prior to the whole stream, and you kind of touched on it briefly.
Well, that's what we wanted that to be a bottle that a bar could replace their, whatever their kind of standard good bourbon that they would use for either neat pours or cocktails, because that's we want people to drink that whiskey. You know what I mean? And so Chris and I spent a lot of time going through all the mash bills, and those particular 2 mash bills, that High Road Rye and the Sweet Mash Bourbon, were the 2 that really did well at that lower proof.
Well, I'm glad. So we've talked a lot about like mouthfeel on these, and the really important thing with all 3 of those bourbons is we did not chill filter anything, because we wanted you to have that full mouthfeel, that full experience, that lasting finish, and I think it really kind of transposed its way into those bottles as well.
Are you guys going in at a lower proof, barrel entry proof? Okay. Yeah.
So when we first started running the stills, we ran them more like a batch system. So the proofs were kind of, our target was 110. But our proofs were kind of, some were a little higher, some were a little lower. As everybody got better at fermentation on the new system, Chris and I noticed the proofs started kind of creeping up. But now we found the sweet spot for us is about 113. So now that from everything from about 2 years ago moving forward, all goes in the barrel at 113.
Okay, nice. And that's one of the things that we all 3 of us have talked about in our videos, was the difference between what we call, or what I've been calling, dusty whiskey versus modern day whiskey, and how that barrel entry proof really affects the mouthfeel and coating as well as the barrel itself.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Those water molecules really love to go in there and grab that caramelized wood sugar, man. It definitely makes for a sweeter whiskey.
Yep. So very cool. Very cool. The wheated one, and Jeff, which one is your favorite? Wheated has definitely been mine. So that
I got to explore these just today. So this is going to be just initial impressions here. The wheated one is what I'm sipping on right now. Yeah. And there is a note at the tail end of the wheated bourbon. I'm going to spend some more time with this, but I keep going back to the same thought of fruits and melons and even like honeydew. And it like breaks through. It's like Barry Sanders breaking through the offensive line of like all the other bourbon flavors. And I just keep coming back to this honeydew note.
The Barry Sanders of bourbon. I love it.
It's like the fruit just won't let go. Like there's all these other big flavors that are around it, but that fruit note just finds the gap and just keeps finding me every
That'll
time.
be our next whiskey collab.
There you go. Hey, single barrel. That's what I'm just saying. Single barrel. Barry Sanders on there. Barry Sanders of bourbon. There we go.
Love it. Speaking of single barrels, will there be like maybe any finished bourbons that you guys are putting out, or single barrel bourbons in the near future?
We've got some plans in the works for now.
Yeah, we've got single barrel bourbon will be, or the plan is to launch single barrel bourbons in 2025.
Yep.
And I will tell you that, fortunately, unfortunately, as we start to get more people aware of our brand, the amount of whiskey that we have starts to look like we're not going to have enough, which it's still going to be a while before that becomes a challenge, but it does, it makes how much single barrel we can make available of the bourbons kind of limited, because we need a lot of that whiskey to keep our pipeline full with the bourbons. But it's funny, back to kind of what I said earlier, Chris and I, the last 2 weeks we've been in the lab, and we're kind of gathering up all the little one-offs and the little this and then that's that are out there that are hanging out that maybe we were going to do this project with, but now that's scrapped or whatever. And we've got some plans stewing for some interesting blends and some interesting single barrel offerings that aren't just our standard mash bills or finishes. So there's going to be some really cool stuff come out next 12 months for sure.
So come back for a good time.
One of those has the HAWF on it, right? For the single barrels. Hello again, friends.
Yeah, I would love that.
We would love it too, man. But no, I'm just excited to get your brand out there, man, because the people that, we just released in Arkansas, the friends that I have here that I've been tasting it for over a year, and they have all loved it. So they're super excited about being able to get it in the state and getting more SKUs as well. So we're excited for what you guys are doing, no matter what happens. And the consistency, the quality that you guys are putting out, bar none, is what the whiskey nerds like us want. So,
well, thank you so much. I know we're running out of time, but I'll just to kind of cap off and to pair on what you're saying there. For all the people watching, folks out there, hardtruth.com. We've got a spirit finder widget. It's not always up to date because we rely on other people to give, to plug in some stuff sometimes, and we can't control what they do. But the most important thing is, if we are distributed in your state and there is, you can't find us, ask your favorite liquor store guy. Say, can you please check with the distributor and bring in Hard Truth, because us going with our salespeople out to try to push product in is very difficult, because there's so much noise on the shelves these days, right?
Yep.
But if you're a fan and you ask for them to bring in something for you, it's almost 100% chance it's going to happen. So ask for that Hard Truth out there.
Absolutely.
And if you're a bar or restaurant or a liquor store entrepreneur and you're interested in the single barrel, we've got a single barrel section in there as well. So definitely reach out to us, and we'd love to have you down.
Nice.
Awesome.
I need it here.
In the description of the video, everybody, I did put a link to that spirit finder. There were a lot of people that were asking questions about where to find your whiskey and if they were in your state. So click that link in the description, and then you'll be able to put in your radius and your zip code and find products.
Yeah. And we didn't even get to talk about the cool distillery. We've also got 325 acres, state-of-the-art distillery, 300-seat restaurant, 1,000-person outdoor music venue, side-by-side ATV tours. We drive, you drink. Come visit us.
No, I mean, literally, a 2024 whiskey goal is to sit outside by a fire pit on a specific stoop that I saw from the restaurant so I can watch a concert. That needs to happen this year.
Pictures of that. Like I have.
Specifically in April.
Exactly.
Let me see. Like, can you see that? Like, I don't know how good it's gonna pop up.
Yeah.
Oh, that color pops.
Outside.
Yeah, that's the table I'm talking about right there.
Yeah.
Like great grounds.
We've got a lot more picnic tables out there now. That place has been jam-packed this last year.
I would imagine.
That's awesome, man. We look forward to seeing you in April for sure. Mid-April, I think, is when we're heading out there. So we'll have Jeff be sure to touch base with you guys, and maybe we can line out something just to hang out for a few minutes.
I would love to. I can't wait to meet y'all.
Come on over.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, Bryan and Chris, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And everybody that has been here watching us, thank you for joining us as well. Learning more about Hard Truth. Everyone that is here knows that we talk about Hard Truth almost every single week.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that.
Literally.
That's awesome. Thanks, guys.
I know I talk about it too much.
Never can be too much.
Dude, ever since leaving, it was like nonstop. I'm like, oh my God.
But everybody, it is time to move on with our Whiskey Wednesdays. Go over and check out Jason at the Mash and Drum. Tell him we sent you, and also continue sipping some Hard Truth tonight. And Chris and Bryan, again, thank you so much for joining us tonight and talking.
Thanks,
Cheers.
everybody.
Cheers, buddy.
Cheers, everybody.
you.
Now, I'm about to play a little song that we do to thank everybody that supports us, but feel free to stick around or drop off your call.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Jeff, just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you say hello again. Oh, Jeffrey, you